Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the United States Army's John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and the best podcast the military has to offer.
Real, bold, and unrestricted.
We're your hosts, Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter,
Major Bobby Tuttle. Welcome to Pineland Underground.
Welcome back to Pineland Underground. Bobby and I sound a little bit weird in this intro because we were sick, but small disclaimer up front. There was a small technical audio issue. It lasts for about the first 19 minutes of this episode where Bobby and I sound a little bit echoey. The guest sounds fine. It resolves itself in 19 minutes. It's nothing crazy, something that we couldn't fix, but still a great episode. Bobby?
Chuck and I are thrilled to be releasing this episode. This is actually a joint venture between Pineland Underground from the Special Warfare Center and School and SOFcast, and the representative of U.S. Special Operations Command down in Tampa. Our episode's kicking off today. We'll dive into that here in just a moment, and SOFcast will be releasing their episode later this week. I hope you tune into theirs as well. Fantastic conversations across some special operations professionals.
Enjoy the episode.
Hey, welcome back to Pineland Underground. We're recording from the Falcon Snail Pub, the Pineland Underground offsite location out in Southern Pines, North Carolina. We have SOFcast in the house with us today, and we're pumped to have Sergeant Major Matt Parrish with us. Over to you, Chuck, to introduce Matt for us.
All right, so we have the one and only Sergeant Major Matt Parrish with us today. Many of you know Matt because he produces and hosts the SOCOM SOFcast Podcast. We recently recorded with Matt on SOFcast, and now he's coming on Pineland as our guest. A little bit about Matt. So Matt joined the military in 2003 as a Special Forces 18 X-ray. This is awesome because we've been talking about the need to bring on a highly successful 18 X-ray. So Bobby, what is an 18 X-ray?
Yeah, so the X-ray program is unique to Army Special Operations, and an 18 series, the 1-8, is representative of Special Forces, specifically in the Military Occupational Specialty, or MOS. Essentially, we take recruits or potential recruits from across the civilian realm and allow them to try out for Special Forces. So they're non-prior service soldiers who come enlist in the Army and are granted the opportunity to try out for Special Forces and continue their pathway in the Army. If they pass assessment and selection and then our qualification course, then they're granted one of the actual MOSs. If they do not pass the tryout and don't kind of meet the standard of what we're looking for, then they have the opportunity to serve in other units across the conventional force in the Army.
All right, so Matt, when he went to the 18 X-ray program, was a Special Forces engineer, and he went to 7th Special Forces Group when they're at Bragg, and then when they transitioned down to Florida. He has numerous deployments to Iraq, Afghanistan, and South America. He was also a member of the 7th Group's Crisis Response Force and has a general reputation for being a badass. He currently runs the SOCOM Preservation of the Force and Families program, hosts the SOCOM SOFcast Podcast, and performs with the SOCOM Paracommando Parachute Demonstration Team. So Matt, welcome to Pineland Underground, the best official podcast in the military.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Bobby. I'm going to have Chuck follow me around and just, slowly read my bio in his very deep and badass voice. No, I appreciate it, fellas. I really enjoyed having you guys on the show. We recorded it last week, and I think we'll probably release this one around the same time, or we'll release ours around the same time you guys release this one. Happy to be here. I'm envious of your offsite location there. You guys are looking good in your video. I'm in my studio here at the SOCOM headquarters. So
we have a studio too that we have to look like that in. So
I'm jealous. I know. Hey,
if
they haven't watched your video from ours. These guys showed up like they were the president and vice president of Pineland.
I
thought I was going to have to give a bribe of Dawn to get them to open up a little bit, but it was a good time. So
hey, but we're calling this one Two Podcasts is Better Than None. SOFcast and Pineland Underground join forces to create an incredible official military podcast. So I just posted on Twitter that we're about to do this, and I was like, look, 2 official podcasts could be completely horrible, or it could be completely badass. But either way, it's going to be impressive, right?
What are 3 Army podcasters going to talk about? Podcasting? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. 3 long tab podcasters. I don't know.
Yeah, 2 nines and a major.
Yeah.
Gross.
All right. And if you're still with us.
Hey, Matt, if you would, before we kind of kick off some of the main themes we wanted to talk about, though, the 18 X-ray program truly has been quite the topic Chuck's not lying. Is we're probably leaning forward. We're going to do a podcast focused on the X-ray programs across RSOF, not just Special Forces, but all three branches.
RSOF is Army Special Operations Forces. It's not like our Special Operations Forces, which I would have thought. That's what I thought it was like my first couple of years in the military.
And it's SOF, not soft, right?
Yeah, Special Operations Forces.
There you go. Most of the time. But hey, can you just give a little insight or a plug for us? Talk to us about the 18 X-ray program and what was your personal experience like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm super biased. I'll start off with that because obviously I was successful. It was one of the best moves I've ever made in my life. It allowed me to have a phenomenal career within Special Forces. There's a ton of value in getting a very solid background, as we used to kind of say, as we got guys into group. Does this guy have a solid background or is he an X-ray, right? It was kind of the joke. Like, did he come from an infantry background? Is he a Ranger Regiment guy, 82nd guy, 101st? Does he have that background and then the Q course? So I think there's a ton of value to that. But I think there's also value in allowing people that want to test their mettle and want to try. Obviously, from the Army perspective, there's a ton of value because you said it very nicely, like that a lot of people don't make it. And then I think you said they get the opportunity to serve in other units across the conventional force. Yes, over 90% of 18 X-rays get that opportunity to go and find another place to serve their country, right? So it's a great recruiting tool for the Army because depending on when that guy or now gal washed out in the course, they've already had a good GT score. They've already been able to pass a PT test. And depending on where in the course they wash out, they may have already had some land navigation training or some team building, rope climbing, obstacle courses, things like that they, now take on to another unit. For me, though, as a guy who got a chance, I was within sort of the first year of when they reintroduced the X-ray program. A lot of people don't realize it existed prior. And then, it was called SF Babies back in the 80s and 90s, things like that. And then after the global war on terrorism kicked off after 9/11, they realized that, hey, although we don't mass produce SOF, we need to surge some more Green Berets. So let's open up this pipeline. And I was within sort of the first year after completing the course. I was, I think, the third X-ray to get to my company in Bravo 37, and I was the first X-ray to come to my team. So it was still very new. It was an incredible opportunity. There was a ton of washout rate sort of in the preparation course and everything else, so that when we actually went to selection, most of the guys that went to selection as X-rays were successful because the weed out had already happened prior. So there was this weird thing around the Army. They're like, how are all these X-rays, how are these guys have like an 85% pass rate in selection? That's ridiculous. And it's like, because you're only seeing like 7% of the guys who joined, they've all already been sort of treaded out. So yeah, man, I mean, I'm happy to, talk whatever you guys want to talk about the X-ray program. I think it's valuable. I think there's a value to having the ability to come in that way. I had some incredible people that, guys that were stock traders, had masters, were all these different things. Like, it wasn't all young kids like me. I was 19 when I joined as an X-ray, but I had guys next to me that were everything from kindergarten teachers to Wall Street dudes to one of my buddies had just graduated from Princeton with his master's and was an X-ray with me. I'm like, what are you doing here, man? I'm 19. Like, this is like, what are you doing, man? You got better career opportunities. But, post 9/11, there was such a call for action and service for so many of us that guys were willing, to say, hey, I don't care what else is going on. I want to serve the nation. I want to respond to this attack on the homeland.
Yeah, I love that. Real quick, what did you do before you enlisted in the Army as an 18 X-ray?
I was in college. I wanted to join out of high school. I was kind of in between the Marines and all these different things. And my parents were like, hey, you have good SATs. You've got good grades, all those things. Like, go to college. If you still want to join afterwards, then commission, all those things. Or at least the opportunity is there. Like, if you still want to enlist, you can, or you can commission, all those things. So I was going to college. I was working at Bass Pro Shops in Atlanta. Just coincidentally, I bring that up because a guy who was working with me, he and I joined the X-ray program together. We actually both all made it all the way through. He went to 5th group and I went to 7th group. So pretty rare after all of that weed out that, two rednecks from Georgia that were, busy shooting archery tournaments and hunting all the time made it all the way through. But yeah, once 9/11 happened, I was like, hey man, college is over, at least for now. I went back and got my bachelor's later, but it wasn't happening there in 2002 when we went to the recruiters,
No, I absolutely dig that. Kind of having served with a good amount of X-rays, whether it was on my detachment or when I was a Special Forces company commander, having guys with all varieties of backgrounds, experiences, levels of college. Obviously, Special Forces and Special Operations attracts lots of people who love the outdoors. I had a taxidermist on my team. I had a guy who passed the bar in Wisconsin, so he was a full-fledged lawyer. I had guys who worked logistics at Amazon, for example, and were like, you know what, I want to do a little bit more with my career and find some great purpose. My genius is going to take me to go, try out for special operations and go see the world. And really
I think
do
we'll
stuff.
talk about that later, but like
Oh,
that's
yeah.
our brand, right? That's
Oh,
our
yeah.
brand is, do you want to be part of the best? And if you do, come to us and we'll help you figure out like what tribe you belong in, right? But if you want to work with the best, you want to serve your country, we want you. We want your skills, and it won't be wasted.
If you want the ability to be creative, right? 'Cause it's what-
Exactly. You want to have a nonlinear ability to problem solve. You want to be able to use all of that experience, intelligence, education that you have around others who are like-minded and are willing to lay it all on the line. That's what appeals, especially to a lot of us. One of the things when I have people on my show, I'm like, hey, what's your origin story? And it's almost always that, right? It's like, I want to be part of the best. I want to see if I can do it. And so I think that's what, as you said, attracts so many of the best and brightest from all these random places. That is so surprising when you're sitting in a fire base or whatever. You're like, bro, you're a kindergarten teacher, and now you're like just slaying bad dudes. It's just like, but it's awesome, man. We get the best and the brightest from across the country and fuse them together in this magic melting pot of problem solvers. It's amazing. Our regiment's awesome.
So what you're saying is when you were going to join, it was 2003. So you weren't like, you know what? This online training looks pretty awesome. I think I want to be a part of that.
Yeah, it was 2002 because, at that point after 9/11, there was such a backlog. We joined in 2002 and didn't get to ship until 2003.
Wow.
Right?
Was that just because so many people were signing up?
So many people were showing
Wow.
up to the recruiters. And
That's
so
awesome.
we showed up and I'll tell on myself because I've told this story before. My buddy who went to 5th Group, shout out to John Bontempo, he went to a Navy recruiter because we were talking about being SEALs, right? Because as the three of us as long tab guys know, they had the right marketing. They had the brand, right?
They
So
still
like,
do.
Yeah, they still do. And it's like, hey, if you want to be part of the best, go be a SEAL, right? We went to, he went to the Navy. I was working that day. He was off. He goes to the Navy recruiter and they're like, hey, you don't have 20/20 eyes. So you can join and sort of, work on a ship for a while. And then you can get this laser eye surgery and whatever else. And we're like, oh, okay, and I didn't have 20/20 eyes either. I'm like, oh, okay. And then we're kind of like, that sounds like swabbing decks for like 3 or 4 years. Like we're trying to go get after it. And, lucky enough, John's brother was his stepbrother was actually serving in 5th Group at the time as a Green Beret and called and was like, what are you guys doing, man? Like, Dad told me you're trying to be a SEAL. Like, I'm a Green Beret, right? Like, what are you thinking?
Talk to the mentor in the family.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, maybe talk to me, And so he's like, hey, man, there's this brand new program that just came out, 18 X-ray. You don't have to have 20/20 vision. Like, if you make it far enough, you will automatically get laser eye surgery in the Q course, like all these things. And basically, John went and signed up one day. I went the next day and was like, hey, I want the same contract. Let's go. And, it's kind of funny. They're like, hold on, high speed. Like, you got to take a ASVAB and some of these other things. I'm like, give me the test. Let's do it. Like, I'm ready. I want to go to Afghanistan today. You know what I mean?
You just hit on like what, joining in 2002 and, basically getting into the program, the pipeline in 2003. What's kept you in though?
Ooh, man, Bobby. Look at that. That's
my wife had an interview the other day. You got an origin story. What's kept you? What's sustained you? What's been that longevity story?
I mean, for me, I'm a guy who has re-enlisted as soon as I entered the window every single time. Like, as soon as they were like, hey, we'll offer you more money to keep doing this, I was like, cool, joke's on you. I would have kept doing it for nothing, I mean, for me, being able to achieve going to a team, and I think your SOF career, your SF career is really shaped a lot by your first team, right? I think your first team is super pivotal to how you imprint, because all you want to do is assimilate, right? You go through this 2 years of qualification course and you just want to simulate. You're like, hey, what is a Green Beret? What do I do? Right. And I was blessed on 782 to have a phenomenal first team. We went to combat 3 times in a row within the first 3 years I was there, or 4 years I was there. We just went back to back to back and we were super tight. And I think it was in the first rotation. I'd only been in for like 3.5 years and they were like, hey, you can re-enlist. I was like, cool. can we go up and do it right now? Like, give me the paperwork, right? And I think,
Let's do it.
And I did that again, later as a 7. And for me, it was always about the team, surrounding myself with amazing people, and feeling like I had a sense of purpose and belonging to my mates left and right of me, but to that higher calling of the nation. Honestly, as a kind of faith-built guy, I felt like it's what God had me on this planet to do, at least for the last 19 and a half years, was to give it everything I had and try to just keep up with all these amazing people who are stronger, faster, smarter, better looking, everything than me. And I just get a chance to be in the team room with them. I'm like, why would I want to go anywhere else, right? The SF team room is a special place. And to be able to be in there for 13 straight years is one of the absolute honors of my life, for sure.
Awesome. So you talking about the faith-based, let's segue that into the POTFF, right? Because you do run preservation of the force and families, and spirituality is still a pillar of that, right? So let's define that. What is the POTFF program?
Sure. Yeah. Preservation of the force and family. There's a little bit of a history lesson there. If you came in recently, you are used to having these amazing human performance training centers, all of these resources. Like most of our groups, and our other places within the SOF enterprise, it's like a Division I football team. It's like a pro baseball team, pro football team, and you got dietitians, strength and conditioning coaches, athletic trainers, all these things. And a little bit of a history lesson, at the beginning of the war, when we were going through all this, about 10 years or so into the war, we started noticing some fraying on the force and family, fraying on the edges, as Admiral Olson at the time mentioned in his testimony to Congress at the time. And this is 10 years of running hard, back to back to back rotations. Chuck, I know you were in the same boat. Bobby, I think you were that was right as you were coming in, right, into SF. And we all wanted to do it. It certainly wasn't a cry from us saying like, hey, we don't want to do this anymore. But that has a toll on your family. It has a toll on your body, your spirit, your mind. And we, at the time, did not have this robust infrastructure around our people to take care of these things, right? And so they commissioned this big report. They go around, do focus groups all across the enterprise, so to speak. And what they came back with was this big study. It was the pressure on the force and family, which then shifted into the directorate that I currently, help manage, which is the preservation of the force and family. And what it means is that we believe your human performance is a compilation of 5 domains, your performance within 5 domains. That's physical, psychological, cognitive, social and family, and spiritual. And we think how well you are performing or failing to perform in each one of those has a holistic, integrated effect on how you ultimately perform, whether that's in the team room, whether that's on the mission field, whether that's back at home. We're not just binary creatures. Like there are these interconnected things that when you are low in one, it can drag another one down. Or if you're strong in one, it can help buoy, an injury or an issue in another. And so our current program, it started sort of small. It was like, hey, let's get physical therapists out to the groups. We had some green suit physical therapists in certain places. I like to tell the story when I was in 7th Special Forces Group, pre-POTFF. I've had a lot of neck and back issues in my career, unfortunately, right? And I've had chronic pain for a long time. And prior to POTFF, I could see that one, green suit Army PT about once a month, right? And you guys all know that when you're deploying and coming back and going to schools and everything else that we do, trying to line up, a very rigid schedule to your very amorphous schedule, especially at the height of the war, pretty tough, right? So that once time a month would turn into like once every quarter. I could see this guy. And you think about that now, I can see a PT in most places once or twice a week, right? I can really get a good continuity of care to be able to get back on the mission or back into the team room, back into the fight a lot faster. And so as it started, it was small. Let's get some contract people out there and start helping. And then it's continued to grow. Currently, it's $100 million a year that we spend on all 5 of those domains. And over 90% of that money goes to labor, right? It is filling in soft, peculiar gaps, meaning there are providers, there are resources that are available to you from the Army. For SWCS and for everybody that's listening from Special Forces, from the Army, from your installation, all of those things, right? And that is sort of big service money that pays for that, right? we are paying POTFF for this MFP 11 pot of money, which is soft peculiar. So because of our rotation, because of the stress we put on our bodies and our families and everything else, we have justification to say what the Army provides to the average soldier at that place and what that installation provides is not enough for a soft SF guy, right? And so we can layer in these athletic trainers, these LCSWs, licensed clinical social workers, these peer-to-peer network coordinators, basically everything that we can try to do to make sure that you are as put together and performing as well as possible in all 5 of those domains.
Matt, I kind of want to ask, so acronym soup that we deal with, I've been in 15 years. I still am on the ATARS list to go to Army acronym school. But, POTFF, so Preservation of the Force and Family. At the Army Special Operations level, we call it Human Performance and Wellness, or HPW. At SWCS, we have the Human Development Directorate. And there's always kind of the same legacy term, or THOR, which was Tactical Human Optimization, Rehabilitation, Recovery, and
nailed it.
Resiliency, I guess.
Bro, you don't have to go to the acronym school. You just crushed it. I think you just clept out.
Do I get officer points, though, Chuck?
Yeah.
No.
But Matt,
it's human performance. You get NCO points.
Matt, over to you though. Are those kind of all the same thing? Are they all synonymous? They basically get after those same 5 pillars, same pot of funding.
Yeah, 100%. So here's the deal. POTFF can mean 2 different things when you talk about it from the SOCOM enterprise level, right? So if you're in a team room right now, you've got obviously your group level, you've got above you 1st Special Forces Command, you've got USASOC, SWCS is in there as the feeding ground and the center of excellence for our career fields. You've got all these different layers going up. Sitting here at the SOCOM level, which is the higher headquarters for all special operations, doesn't matter, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, everything comes up to sort of this level. So for us here, POTFF is 2 things. One, it's the overarching umbrella term for everything that touches our people in those 5 domains, right? But POTFF is also a very specific contract vehicle that pays $100 million a year to get labor that is in those places, right? So that's sort of confusing in some places, right? So in SWCS, as I mentioned earlier, you've got some resources provided by your installation. You've got some provided from the Army in conventional money. Like, you get the same resources that a regular conventional unit would get, right? And so what USASOC has decided to do is like, hey, let's rename that so that like everything that touches our people is HPW, right? Human Performance and Wellness. And POTFF is the contractors, right? And so a couple years ago, before I got in this job, kind of the administration before us, so to speak, they very much went out everywhere and tried to say, like, stop calling it Thor, stop calling it Perez in the Marine Corps, stop calling it all of these different things, HP out in NSW, all these, everybody had their different names. And sort of POTFF and SOCOM leadership was going everywhere saying, hey, one naming convention, we got to cut all this out, because what was happening is we'd get these incredible congressional members who wanted to help, right? Like, we are funded from Congress. Right, that's what's very important to me here in my seat, is to advocate to Congress that we continue the spigot of money to be able to provide what you need in that team room right now, right? So we would have these congressional folks that would go out, and let's say they go to SWCS, right? And they visit SWCS and they're touring your version of HPW, right? And they would come back and they would literally launch RFIs. They were like, hey, why are we spending so much in POTFF? Like HPW or Thor seems like a better answer. Right. And then we'd have to go back and undo that and say, actually, that's the same thing. It's just a different name, whatever. So there was this huge push, like, no more. Everything's got to be named POTFF. And then as we came in, we're like, you know what? I don't think that's the right answer. We want every unit to take ownership of this. What's interesting about the POTFF program is all of those different providers and everything all across this big global enterprise, they don't work for me. We pay for them, but they work for you guys as this, commanders and senior enlisted at the element, right? So we want that unit to take ownership of that program. And if it means calling it something else to freshen the name and get people in there and understand what they're talking about, cool. All we ever ask, and I'll say this to your listeners, because hopefully there's some team sergeants, team leaders, company commanders, company sergeant majors on up. If you've got a Congress member or somebody else that comes in there and you're highlighting these amazing programs, just throw a little tagline in the bottom of there like, and this is funded through your funding of POTFF, right? As long as you do that, that gives me ammo in my magazines so that as I'm talking to the congressional folks, we keep the money coming so that you can get all these amazing things that you need, right? So.
No, Matt, I dig it. And Chuck and I have actually had numerous conversations. We did a podcast together, Forged in Fire. But, Sergeant Major Ritter here talking about what life was like as a combat injured individual with his injuries before POTFF, before the facilities existed, before the therapists were there, before all those resources were available, but then also his second time getting injured overseas, and how that helped him get back into the fight, back into a team, and realize that new normal.
In record time, right? It took 4 years the first time before we had anything, and then it took months the second time. And mainly, these resources keep you in check. As a Green Beret, you're going to push yourself to the limit, and you're going to probably keep hurting yourself. And you're not going to know the signs and symptoms of your mental wear either. Before, you remember, we had one physical therapist, but you also only had one psych for the entire group. Remember that? And that would take forever to get into. But then when we had all those online, we had the sports psychs, and we had the therapist, and you had the trainers right there. And the trainer would be like, nah, man, don't be a dumbass. Don't do this. This is what we're going to do. And then the therapist would be like, yeah, don't do that. And then you could do it in an intelligent manner, and you could actually get better instead of just being stupid like we always are.
Yeah, 100%. I'll throw out one other kind of plug, and that's for our kind of sister organization, which is the Warrior Care Program, used to be known as Care Coalition. Yep. A lot of people don't understand how that sort of integrates. That is a separate section than POTFF, but it basically overlaps, right? So in the case of Chuck being injured there, right, like everything that you have in your local area, in your unit that's helping you in these things, that's pretty much paid for by POTFF mostly, right? But if you need to get connected to something outside of your unit, let's say you want to go to Exos and Andrews Institute and Gulf Breeze and do a very intensive 30 days there to help. Care Coalition is the mechanism that gets you there. They connect to the outside, whether it's non-federal entity, whether it's 501c3 paying your way to get there. They get you through the legal process, and they're your advocates to make sure that, like, hey, let's say you get injured overseas, you get flown up to Walter Reed, and you want your family, obviously, to come there. Rather than you trying to figure out how to come out of pocket as you're laying there, having surgery, Warrior Care Program's there making sure that, like, hey, we cross the T's, dot the I's, so that you don't get screwed from legal afterwards, but that we can do the right thing. And so they're really complementary, but they are two separate programs. You got regional care coordinators all across the country. If you don't know your Warrior Care, Regional Care Coalition, Regional Care Coordinator, I would go find that person. I didn't do that. I was already like multiple spinal surgeries into it before I ever got enrolled in that joint. And then I realized, like, oh, this is actually something I probably should have done earlier so that I could, like Chuck said, get back a little bit faster than just doing it on my own.
But what I think is so damn impressive, too, about these resources we have within special operations, you go on X Special Forces group, whichever one you go to, and like you said, you're seeing a world-class facility that rivals an NFL team.
Yeah, we brought in Hendricks Motorsports, and they were like, what? Because, you go look at their pit crews, and that's like athlete. That's like
Division
a professional.
I athletes.
Yeah. But they came into the facility that we got right next to each other. You got a cold dunk tank, and you got the hot tub, and you've got right into the therapy room and a pool that will go on itself so you can do your therapy in there. And this facility looks like, I don't even know how many square feet it is. It's ridiculous.
Massive. It's huge, humongous. And it's nice. It's well equipped. It looks phenomenal. Like, it looks state of the art. But, also that's not our place of work. In SOF, you're going to spend a majority of your time, probably 70 to 80% of your time out in theater, whatever training exercises you have or operational deployments, whatever that looks like. And so, plenty of times where I've been under triple canopy jungle and you don't have those facilities, so what are you doing with those minimal resources you do have forward? Well, you have reach back. Say you're living out of a hotel room in X city working out of the embassy. Well, you have reach back so you can work through with your nutritionist, with your coaches, strength and conditioning, all that stuff out of the hotel room or in triple canopy jungle or on X FOB overseas or Firebase.
And they've also got the boxes you can take with you too. Now the past couple deployments been we call it the Thor 3 deployment box, and has everything in there you need for a detachment or two detachments to train on and do all your physical therapy downrange on your own accord, or your yoga mats.
Absolutely. I used to love if we got a PDSS, sometimes you don't, but if you do get a pre-deployment site survey and you can go down there, one of the things was always like, take full pictures of every possible thing we can use for a gym, and then bring it back and just dump it on that, athletic trainer and the strength and conditioning coach. Like, hey, bro, I'm going to be in this place for 4 months. I've got this like life cycle treadmill that may or may not work. I've got like 3 15-pound weights and like, make me something, right? And he's like, all right, here's some bands, here's whatever, and they would make a program around what you could do, right? And I'll make one other correlation, Bobby, to talking about these big facilities and all these things, because we get a little heat from, not heat, but there's some scrutiny over that, right? Because
why?
It's big, it costs a lot of money, right? Anytime there's a lot of money involved, right? But here's why it's important, right? We talked about earlier at the beginning how we attract the best talent in the world, right? And one of the biggest things that, I've been here in POTFF for almost 3 years now. One of the biggest culture shifts that I've tried to message as often as I can is when I first got to group, we talked a little bit about how there wasn't a lot of resources. Well, there was also a different culture around raising your hand over a small injury and taking care of it before it became a big one, right? And so the way I relate it, we talked a little bit about Division I football and things like that, right? So I'm from Georgia. I'm a big Georgia fan. Go Dogs. So when a kid gets recruited to Georgia, right, he's one of the best in the world at what he does. He doesn't come in there and think that all of his helping resources around him are spotting and assessing and looking for ways to get him off the field, right? Everybody in that building, from top to bottom, from the person who's laying out his equipment to the person who's helping him fuel, to the person that's helping him lift, recover, all those things. Every person is trying to make sure that he is optimally performing on the field on Saturday, right? They're not looking for ways to get him off the field. They're ways to get him on the field, right? And that's what we want from our POTFF providers. That's what we want from our facilities and all these things. When I was coming up, first many years in group, you felt like a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Like, if I show any weakness to any of these things, they will pull me off of a deployment or they will do these things. And so we want to make sure, we've done a really good job as an enterprise and as in Special Forces specifically about changing the culture of small physical injuries, right? It used to be a dirt bag. If like, hey, man, I turned my ankle really badly on this ruck this morning, I'm going to go over and see somebody. Like, yeah, better take your ruck with you because it's going to be in the hallway when you get back, right?
Rub some dirt on it. You'll be good.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas now it's like, yeah, man, go get tuned up because we've got this thing in 2 months. Like, go see the physical therapist, get squared away because we need you in 2 months for this real deployment, whether it's an unconventional warfare thing or whether it's more of a direct action focus. Well, where we've got to go now, and we're getting there, and things like your suicide episode and things like that are helping us, we've got to have that same culture about all of those other domains in POTFF, right? We've got to look at it in the same way about a mental change, a small mental injury or a moral injury and spiritual, or a chink in the armor when it comes to your social and family, something going on with your marriage, that we're going to preemptively go after that and take care of it proactively so that it doesn't become this mushroom cloud, right? Like, if I got to the end, the bottom of a mountain in Afghanistan and I looked up that mountain and I was like, holy shit, I should have done some PT. Like, I didn't do any legs and I didn't do any aerobic capacity. I'm not going to be able to climb this mountain. I would be the worst SF dude in the entire regiment and I'd get drummed off a team, right? Yet we still allow ourselves to get to the bottom of the proverbial psychological, cognitive, social, and family or spiritual mountain and say, oh man, I have done no work in this area and now I'm so surprised that I'm having an issue, right? Like, if nothing else, if you're a young dude coming into our formation, dude or gal, you have case studies for the last 20 years of people laying it on the line consistently. And you are not a unicorn. Like, these people, some of the strongest men I've ever met in my life are falling apart from some of these things, and you're not any better or different than them. So don't expect that by not investing and proactively working on these other things that you won't also have issues as you live this life, right? And so we've got to change that culture where in every one of those phases, I'm willing to go and proactively work on myself before it becomes a major injury, right? And that's where we've got to get, whether you call it POTFF, HPW, whatever you want to call it, we've got to take care of ourselves to make sure we're ready to put it on the line when the nation needs us.
It goes back to the humans are more important than hardware concept, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yes. So
and
it's
we say that, and sometimes it's a bumper sticker, but it's true, right? Like, the reason we want to be in that team room is the other humans in that team room. It's not because, like, oh man, I got this cooler weapon than I would have if I was over in some other place. Like, that's cool, but that's icing on the cake.
Yeah, or like
right?
the cries and stuff.
The
Like,
real
this stuff,
reason.
it's just equipment. It's nothing,
Exactly.
right?
I'd rather take 6 really awesome dudes with 1960 equipment and go somewhere than have the baddest, newest, cool thing that would be on Instagram and have a bunch of dirtbags with me, right? Like, we know that. It's the humans. It's not the hardware, right?
No, precisely. Hell yeah.
True story. Let's transition a little bit here. In your opinion, between SOFcast and Pineland Underground, who has the better looking hosts?
I mean, you guys have me outnumbered, so I think I got to go with you guys. You guys pulled a slicky boy on me where I had you on the show. You guys had like multiple flags and you were in uniform, and Bobby was flexing like multiple times how he'd been to ILE. He was so educated and all these things. And then you have me on your show and I'm like, all right, I got to put this uniform on. I got to go over there because I'm expecting the same thing. And then you guys just cool guy out on me. Like, hey, we're in polos. We're cool.
We're in a pub.
We're in a pub. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a Wednesday afternoon.
We got drinks under the table. Like, hey, point taking, guys. You win. All right. I got it. You got me. All right. I'm here. You're cool. I'm not. All right. Got it.
Hey, we're all just inside the G base, right? You got to do what you got to do to stay inside that G base.
It's part of our marketing scheme, right? You get a sergeant major and a major on the SWCS podcast. Like, you have to use some gimmicks to make that cool.
But I also really just want, like, I want people to be looking on the globe that they have or the map, be like, where's Pineland? Like, is it in the stands? Like, is it South America?
There's some kid right now looking like, where is this?
Well, so interesting story. So the Falcon Snail pub, right? It's just in my basement. But one of my buddies put it on Google and had a bunch of reviews. And at one point, the police chief and the cops showed up, and they were like, "Hey, man, like, what's going on here? People have been calling saying you're running an illegal pub out of your bar, or out of your house." But now I'm friends with the police chief, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But,
There you go. Hey, force multiplication, right?
It happens,
Doesn't matter
right?
how you get in, you're in.
I did get asked the other day too with Pineland Underground. A guy came to me. He's like, "So is that like the intraweb like radio for Robin Sage?" And I was like,
Oh.
"Yes, it is."
Interesting.
well, 2 majors have also come to me at work. You're like, "Hey, are you guys getting kickbacks from this pub? Like, what's the angle here?" Like,
You're getting free drinks at least. Like, what's going on? You're doing a lot of advertising.
yeah, what's up? All right, Bobby, what you got?
All right, so kind of shifting a little bit. Hey, so you're at the SOCOM level, right? Really, so it's the 4-star level. We just had a changeover with our new command team at SOCOM. So General Fenton and then Command Sergeant Major Shane Shorter, both Special Forces individuals. But just from kind of your viewpoint, what's kind of the view of SF from the SOCOM lens? And then what do you see kind of from that SOCOM lens that Special Forces and RSOF is kind of asked to do across all of the different special operations entities that we have out there?
Well, I will start off by being political and saying what I'm about to say is completely Matt Parrish's opinion and is not SOCOM, the commander, the CSM, or anybody else up here. Here's the deal. It's a big staff up here, right? I am lucky enough to have some access and placement into some meetings that I think provides interesting lens on some of our podcasts and things like that to be able to inject some of that stuff. But I'm not in the meeting where General Fenton's like, all right, guys, what do we think about SF? You know, but I will just tell you, we talked about it a little bit when you guys were on our show. SF's never met a mission we didn't like or a mission set we didn't like, right? And it's because we have phenomenal people. It's because we're adaptable, and it's because we have made our regiment, our career. We stand on the shoulders of giants that have been able to do more with less and been able to solve problems in amorphous space with little to no support, right? And so the more the ball rolls on that momentum, the more, of course, like, why would you say no to anything? Because you have this pack of wolves behind you that can do anything, right? So when something comes up, yeah, SF will do that. Hey, we'll do that. Hey, we'll send one of our dudes to that school, and then we have our organic capability to do whatever it is, right? And so we've continued to build that Swiss Army knife. Now we're in a shift where we're going more back to lower level competition. And I think, in the last couple of years, there's been talk of like, hey, how do we need to build different capacity or units or whatever? And it's like, well, there's a pretty good regiment that was built for this and has like amazing people who are really good at this. And yes, they've been maybe a little bit, the sliding scale has been focused a little bit more on direct action and counterterrorism. But as we talked about when you guys are on my, on our show, we've been doing this, right? Like, I'm a 7th Group dude. I've spent a ton of time in Central South America continuing to maintain relationships. And it wasn't like, all right, hey guys, global war on terrorism's on, so see you punks later whenever we're done. Like, no, we were still coming back and doing this. And I know Bobby and his guys in first group are doing that. Like, I think it gets overplayed a little bit sometimes. And it's a little bit insulting to our regiment, in my opinion. Again, this is Matt's opinion, to pretend like we haven't been nurturing and maintaining those relationships. Like, we're not having to make cold calls in a lot of these places. Mm-hmm. And it's because SF guys have continued to go in there and do the right thing, right? And so I think the view of Special Forces, again, this is completely informally, this is just me seeing and hearing things, is that we have great folks, but we have overcommitted to some of those other things, and that's why you see other units trying to bite into what has historically been our bread and butter, right? You see other units. When we chase other units' missions, other units see that vacuum and are like, well, I can get work. I can create a whole new soft force that does almost exactly what SF does in my different service, right? And then I can be those guys. And then when the entire tenor of the competition space changes to where we need enabled ops and we need partner force ops, well, now even the guys whose mission we were chasing are like, oh, wow, I can do partner force too. It can't be that hard, right? And so I think we need to continue the road that our leaders have already put us on as far as our regiment. I think everybody's been saying the right things, doing the right things as far as rebluing and maintaining that, like, hey, guys, it's a sliding scale. It's not an all or nothing thing. It's not binary. And we, some of our force has been really dug into this, but we know that a lot of you guys have been code switching back and forth between both. And also, we're doing a lot of partner force stuff even during the war in GWAT, right? And so it's not like it's a completely new muscle. Most Green Berets have led combat patrols with partner force as a force multiplier. And that is what we exist to do. All the way back to, hey, I'm a two-man, SME going into an embassy or whatever, right? There's a huge ability for our guys and gals now to have adaptable problem solving and to be who the nation needs us to be, right? And so I think we're on the right path. As we talked about when you guys are on my show, like, we've got to continue to reinforce to the younger guys and gals that, like, this stuff matters, right? It may not be the kill TV that you were watching when you joined and you're like, yeah, man, I'm going to be Chuck Ritter, like, boom, I'm going to do this. It may look a little different, but it's still going to be just as important and just as impactful to the safety and security of our nation. So, yeah, that's a long answer to say, like, just Matt's opinion.
Yeah, but I think that's key, right? Like you said, our bread and butter is through a partner force or indigenous elements, right? And then problem solving. You said that multiple times. I think we have the ability to plan and problem solve in an ambiguous environment with indigenous forces better than anybody else, right? And that's not the sexy stuff. That's not the direct action stuff. Right. But like you said, it's very important.
But you have to be a master. Like, the way you truly know if you're a master of something is how well you teach it to someone who has no background in it, right? And so it doesn't mean that, like, we're going to stop training on direct action or in small unit tactics, all these things. Like, we've got to be experts in all of those things in order to ensure that we're not just teaching what the book says, but we have the experience and the expertise and the wisdom to be able to teach the why and color between the lines of those things. That's what separates us, in my opinion, in a lot of the partner force, like how we become the partner of choice. Anybody can come in with an interpreter and teach you what the book says. SF can come in and teach you, because of wisdom, intelligence, experience, and education fused into wisdom, to be able to say, like, hey, this is why you go left instead of right here, or this is why you set up security this way, and this is what can happen if you don't do it, because I've seen it, my brothers have seen it, and this is what we're bringing you real things, and we're building real relationships. That's the other thing that makes us the partner of choice. Anybody can come and set a sack of cash down and say, like, hey, be my friend. Pull up some signal groups and some WhatsApp groups across our regiment with guys who have been in touch with people in their AOR for decades, right? And there are leaders of, like, there are strategic leaders who our guys taught them how to shoot pistols when they were lieutenants, right? And you can't replace that in anywhere else in the DoD, in my opinion.
Yep.
To kind of follow up with that, though, too, is, we were just talking that Army Special Operations, so RSOF, Army specific, and really which originated with Special Forces, really that 4 to 6 months of language and cultural and regional training that guys and gals go through here at the Special Warfare Center totally sets people apart. I know NSW, I don't think has their language program anymore. MARSOC is significantly smaller. We work hand in hand with those guys out of Camp Lejeune. But that's what sets our SOF apart. Is you go through that close to 1 year of training, and then you tack on the 4 to 6 months of cultural and regional expertise so that you can build that rapport. You understand cultural nuances, history, traditions, and that way when you go to work with that partner force, you're not relying on that interpreter like Matt's kind of saying. You're trying. You got your foot in the door with that indigenous or that host nation force, and you've tried. You can understand them on a human level, which is what language truly gives you. And it builds trust. It builds relationships. And that generational relationships, like I can't tell you the number of times I've been to Thailand or the Philippines. On multiple occasions, my counterpart continues to progress in rank. I'm still, a captain at the time or maybe a major now. But now they're decision makers in their department of the Army or in their special operations units. Like they are the leaders. And you happen to just be close friends because you've broken bread, you've got a few airborne ops together, exchanged wings, and you still keep in touch with them, even though they're on the other side of the globe. And those are true relationships that SF folks go through. It's impressive.
Yeah. One of my favorite personal Green Beret stories on that is, we have in 7th Special Forces Group, and specifically in C37, back when it was Crisis Response Force and before when it was the SIF, we had this thing called Forces Commando, which is basically like an international CT and sniper competitions, a bunch of PT, shooting, all these things down in Central South America every year. And it was basically like a 7-person team, 7-guy team from every one of our partner forces would come together in a third-party location, and one of the countries would host it, and we would compete against each other. Have this, it was awesome because you got basically like a touch point with like 20 other nations, and you're living there for 2 weeks together. You're shooting. It's one of the best rapport building things you could possibly ever have, right? Well, I competed one year in the Dominican Republic. I think it was like 2010 or so. Fast forward a few years later, and I'm going as the PDSS, again, pre-deployment site survey, for a JSET, or Joint Combined Exchange and Training, that we're going to do into Panama, right? And there are 4 partner nations or 4 partner units that we want to talk to on this pre-trip, and we have contact with 3 of them, and 1 of them we have no contact. We have nothing historical. And so we just decide, like, let's drive out there, right? So we drive over there. We get to the front gate. We're 3 gringos. We think, hey, we're just going to have the gringo key. They're going to see our, awesome rapport building faces and just be like, come on in. It was quite the opposite. It was gun barrels pointed at us. We were at the fence, and we were basically locked down, like, get the F out of here, right? Nice. Through the fence, I see a guy walking way across the compound he competed against me and with me in Forces Commando like 3 years before. I remember his nickname. I yell his nickname out. He turns, comes over. 30 minutes later, maybe 15 minutes later, we're having lunch in the commander's office. We set back the stage to where now, okay, that unit is part of this JSET. Fast forward a couple years later, I'm down as another PDSS. I'm a single person down with the Secret Service for President Obama's trip down to Panama. And I'm linked up with my Secret Service counterpart. We haven't worked together at all. I'm building rapport with him. He's got this long list. He speaks no Spanish. He's got this long list of requirements of things he's got to know to bring back to the White House and bring back to the Secret Service so that they can do this visit, right? We get in the embassy. There's this big old meeting. Everybody comes in, all these heads of state, everybody. And all of a sudden, the commander of the counter-assault team for the local nation walks in, right? And I nudge my Secret Service guy. I'm like, hey, we're good. So what do you mean we're good? I'm like, I know that guy. It's the same dude, right? Now he's in charge of all of the counter-assault for the entire country and for the capital city. I'm like, hey, oh yeah, Flacco. We come over, rap with him, blah, 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 blah. I hand the Secret Service guy back this completely filled out sheet. He hasn't understood a word of what we were saying. And he looks at me. He's like, we have a Secret Service meeting. I'm still friends with this guy. It's awesome. He goes to the Secret Service meeting. He's like, I don't know who these guys are, but we need them in every single place we go.
Yes.
Right? Nice. That's what Green Berets provide to the nation, right? And yeah, that story's about me, but there's 1,000 better ones across our regiment of guys who have done the same thing, who've maintained relationships, and have left a positive impression wherever we've been with this flag on our shoulders, right? That's what it's about.
Yep. You spawned something, and you're our guest, but I just want to tell a super quick, way watered down story about civil affairs, PSYOP, and special forces and what we can do, right? So way back, 2010-ish, we were somewhere, and we were tasked to build an element. We built this unit we called the Population Studies Group. which is not classified. We can say that.
Population studies group.
But anyway,
real vanilla.
we took civil affairs, and we would go into an area that we knew was contentious, or we knew that there were people there, and we would start a project, right? So it gave us forced access and placement as well, or building something. We come in, we do an area assessment with the local police, and we just come in overtly, right? And then while they were doing that, we had a recce team looking at the people that we had concerns about. What are they going to do when an overt presence comes in, right? So we could gather what we were doing. And then we'd have our psychological operations team, who we were built in there, and we would figure out how we could influence this area, because maybe we could have the problem solve itself, right? But we'd influence the area, and maybe it required some direct action. So we had our unit that would do that, and maybe one of the trucks that came in for a project would just happen to have some commandos in the back of it, something, right? Do our raid, and then after the fact, come back with our psychological operations element and influence the area on whatever it is that we need to influence the area on, right? And then come back to civil affairs. I had one incident with this unit where they decided to get into a wreck down in this major city, mess up a bunch of shops, and my civil affairs lead is like, hey man, I have SERP money for this. I can take care of this legally, so it's not a problem. So that was like a game changer there too. But using all of our elements within Army Special Operations together like that, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, it's actually cross-functional and not just something we brief on a slide. Like, oh, it actually works. The puzzle pieces fit together, and it actually works really well. It's awesome.
It can, right? I think that, but again, that's what we do in special operations or special forces specifically, but we build that capacity, and that element lasted past us. Mm-hmm. It endured for a while until it got shut down for other reasons. But anyway.
I just think those relationships are the most critical thing. First Special Forces Command tagline, the bumper sticker is the indigenous approach and the partner force of choice for all of our partners across the globe that that we want to work with. But in crisis, or as crisis happens, that's when those relationships come in handy. That's when it's going to take so much time to get through the bureaucratic process of getting people in the country, finding out information, ground truth. It's like, nope, you literally pull out that signal chat, whatever you have, and you call up your friend, your commando you have worked with, and you go point to point and can get real-time information and say, okay, what do you guys need? Here's what we can do. All right, this is where we'll meet you. Let's go. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Hey, switching gears here again, this is going to be a good one for you. So again, maybe you can't answer this through the exact SOCOM lens, but what is SOCOM's outlook right now on recruiting the force of tomorrow? At least in the Army, we have a recruiting issue, and the way we see it in SF is if we don't get ahead of it, it's gonna hurt. And I can only assume it's the same in the other elements, maybe not the Marines, because the Marines just seem to have all the people they ever need, but what's happening there? Like, how does SOCOM view that, and how are we trying to get ahead of it? And is it a problem in the other regiments?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I will again say, very much Matt Parrish's opinion,
Disclaimer.
And not the opinion of anybody in U.S. SOCOM, because I'm very opinionated. If you haven't figured it out already,
wait, what?
But I'm like 5 months from retirement, and there's no E10, so here we go. Right. Here's the thing. I will put a plug in because I was just talking to CSM Shane Shorter about some of these things. And I will put a plug in for that guy. Again, I'm retiring. There's no E10. There's no reason. Like, I'm not trying to curry favor with the boss. That's a good dude, man. He is an SF dude and a legit good dude. I got a chance to sit down. I didn't know him at all. Got a chance to sit down with him before we had him on the podcast. Got like 2.5 hours of his time. And it was the same conversation, even though he's got more education and experience and everything now. But I guarantee it's the same type of conversation I would have had with him if he was my team sergeant or my company sergeant major or all those things. Like, really, really solid, down-to-earth, authentic dude. We had him on our podcast just to say, like, hey, who is this guy? Where's he come from and everything? But I think if you listen to that, you will hear that guy cares, and he hasn't forgotten. I'll put it that way. But I was having a conversation with him about this because SOCOM, when we talk about Section 10, U.S. Code 10, Section 164, 167, all of that, which basically the two differences between that is SOCOM being service-like and SOCOM being operational focused, right? And so SOCOM commander has the rare ability to wear both those hats. And what that means is has some operational control of forces, but also is in charge of man, train, and equip. And so normally, like in the Army, the other services, the Army man trains and equip people, and then they give them to other places to be operationally in charge, right? SOCOM has a weird thing where they have a little bit of both, which is an interesting concept. But again, that's a sliding scale between all of it's no fail. how much time do we spend focusing on 164 versus 167? How much time do we spend on the service-like parts of it? In my opinion, the biggest service-like parts of it are recruitment, leadership development, and then how we onboard talent, how do we develop talent, how do we offboard talent, because that helps our recruitment later, right? Some of the best recruiters we have are guys that are reintroduced back into the community that had stellar careers within RSOF or within SOCOM and want to bring in the next generation of the best and brightest to be able to carry the mantle and serve our country. And so the weird thing about it, though, is that right now, as we're service-like, there is no unit here or directorate within this staff that is in charge of overall SOF recruitment, which is interesting, right? So that's why I don't have a very clear-cut, hey, this is what SOCOM says about it, because that is a service responsibility, right? So that is pushed down to USASOC, AFSOC, MARSOC, NSW, all the component commands, the special operations commands of that component or of that service, right? And so I think all of us that have our head somewhat pulled out of our rear see it as a possible problem, right? The 20 years of GWAT being over, you've got a very big amount of, a very large amount of folks that have hit their 20-year mark, coinciding with the end of the wars, and we had our biggest ramp up ever, and now it's 20 years past that, right? So we know we're going to life cycle some folks out. We know that now, instead of having that call to service that we had after 9/11, we've got a more amorphous call of, hey, come and help us compete, right? It's not that that's not true, but it's maybe not as sexy to the 19-year-old dude who's working at Bass Pro Shops who's like, I want to go get my gun on in Afghanistan, right? So we know we're facing challenges with that. And I think it is true across the different services. What I think will happen, Matt's opinion again, is I think our in-service recruitment will go up some, right? Here's the thing. At the end of my career on a team, right, I was in the CRIF. I had gone to combat back to back to back to back, and then they pulled us back when Iraq dried up. The rest of 7th Group was going to Afghanistan, and they would not let us go to Afghanistan anymore because they wanted somebody down doing all the stuff we talked about earlier, maintaining those relationships in Central and South America and making sure that we weren't turning our back on the homeland. That sucked, right? It was a good mission, but when your mates are going and getting their gun on and you're losing friends still, it was not fun because someone else was doing the kinetic thing. Now, there's not significant other people doing that kinetic thing. SOF is the thing doing the real-world missions, right? And so if you're in the conventional force and you've gone to JRTC and NTC a couple times and you're still not getting in to put it on the line, even if it's not kinetically, even if it's just going out and actually playing a game, so to speak, to use the sports analogy, you're going to start looking and like, where can I get on the field? Well, I can get on the field in RSOF, right? As an 18, a 37, or a 38, I can go train and then go work with others and put it to the test, right? And so I think, again, could be completely wrong, I think our in-service recruitment may go up a little bit as we're engaged. If we're messaging it correctly and we are stewards of the brand, so to speak, if we're putting the right things out there to say, hey, you can still be part of the best, you can come to us, I think we'll still get folks. I think we're going to lose some folks, though. There's a lot of us that are banged up, and I asked General Clark when I had him on our podcast if he was concerned about this. Prior to him switching over with General Fenton, it was the second time I had him on. I forget what episode it was. It was probably season 2 finale or something like that. And I asked him, I said, hey, are you worried about this? Because I'm worried about this as a Green Beret E9. I'm worried that 20 years later, a bunch of guys are banged up, all these things, we're going to have a lot of folks get out. And he's like, hey, man, are we going to have, are we going to lose some talent? Absolutely. He's like, I'm reliant on the leaders down below us to spot and assess and try to make sure that we're managing the talent as best we can and that we're promoting the right people, we're pulling the right people up. Like, sometimes you can't help but lose some of the people you don't want to lose, basically, was his answer, right? But what we've got to do is make sure that we fill their positions with the right people, right? We have the right people. We have force-generated the right people across RSOF in this case. We've got to make sure that we're not checking the block on NCOERs and things like that, that we're really spotting and assessing the right people to fill these voids, that have the experience, the intelligence, education, and are the right people at the right times. And I think it was a good answer. It's tough, right? We ebb and flow as a nation and as a service and as a regiment based on what's going on geopolitically, right? And so we know prior to most of our time, prior to GWAT, it was a little bit more in a valley of some of those things, right? but who was actually getting it on when things were going, right? SOF was. Whether it was in Panama, whether it was in Somalia, whether it was in all these different places, SOF was involved in a lot of things. And there was a lot of real-world operations going on that, we don't talk about on podcasts during all that time, right? There's guys in El Salvador and guys in all these different places, below the news line that were doing the business for the nation. And I think it'll still maintain that way. And I'm a patriot, so I'm rooting that we don't have issues with it, right? Because I think our force is more than needed. And I think this new era that we're embarking upon, I think our force is needed even more, right? And so I'm hopeful that, and I'm encouraged every time I meet young dudes that are like on teams, right? Like I always joke, like no generation has ever thought the generation behind them was worth anything. Everybody, like, these new kids, whatever, we're not worth anything, blah, blah, blah. Go meet some of those kids, man. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are at SWCS. You guys get to see it more than I do. Like, go down and see some of the great Americans that are going through the course right now and tell me that we don't have the right people trying to join our ranks.
Hey, but I think that you're a good example, right? You started as a 19-year-old, came in as an 18 X-ray, moved all up the ranks to now where you're hosting the SOCOM podcast, right? And I talk a lot of smack about first group with Bobby, but it's really just professional jealousy because I feel like seventh group.
I would be jealous too if I
first
only
group
went to CENTCOM.
Get to go to like third group and fifth group, like we just. But you came as an 18 X-ray, and you went to seventh group. You got to go to South America, and got to fight in the wars, and you were in a criff, right? So you've got your lower back new Diff Jones tattoo, like every criff guy does.
Actually, for most of our guys, it was lower leg, but I'm one of the weirdos who doesn't have them.
So you get to do a normal SOF mission, and you got to do the more kinetic direct action assaulter type mission, right? And now you're working at the highest, and you're getting to run and have a great time with not just the SOCOM podcast, but doing something that's incredibly important, which is the preservation of the force and families, right? So you're getting to do two things that have an actual impact, but you moved all up the ranks from just being on the street. And that's an opportunity that anybody has, right? You can do that. And I think that's pretty badass.
Well,
there's been so many times in my career, Chuck, that I'm sitting there thinking, what is a kid from just the middle of nowhere, Georgia, like, how are they paying me to do this?
Yeah, right.
Like, there are things that have been absolutely priceless, like pulling security for presidents, overlooking glacial lakes in Patagonia, Argentina, with I'm one of the only people that's allowed to carry a gun and make sure that I've got a head on a swivel. But I'm taking a moment to look over and be like, bro, I'm 25 meters from the president. We're on a mountain. We're overlooking Patagonia, this glacial lake. Like, what am I doing here, right? I'm flying through the middle of downtown Miami on a realistic urban training exercise on a Blackhawk, and I'm the rope master hanging out, I'm on the beam hanging out, and I'm like, what am I doing here, man? They're paying me to do this, right? Now, there's plenty of other times where you get shot at and everything else. You gotta draw on those times when, like, man, I would do this for free, because then there's times where you're like, they couldn't pay me enough to maybe do that again. We all have been there, right? But tell me where else you have the amount of opportunity to see a diverse mission set, to be a problem solver with the autonomy, with the freedom to be able to make your own decisions and do what's right for the unit, what's right for the nation, and have that put upon you with the best people in the world next to you, left and right. I mean, it is a phenomenal, like, I'm a little bit of an American homer and an SF homer, right? Like, you can tell I care about this stuff, but, like, where else in the land of opportunity do you get this much opportunity? I don't know.
You get to leave a legacy. You get to leave a legacy that impacts the next generation behind you, do absolutely cool shit while you're doing it with great perks. I mean, not going to lie. Like, it's cool to be in the Army. It's cool to do. People don't just go around saying, thank you for your service. Like, people genuinely mean that, and they look up to you just because you have served, especially in the Special Operations Regiment. And then, you are immediately a role model for people as well, because you did volunteer to serve, your country and do these unique things on behalf of the nation, and then just be surrounded by giants. Like, who wouldn't want to do that?
Yeah, I think we take that for granted sometimes too, that the caliber of people we get to work with, right? We don't realize it sometimes, and I'm just realizing now, like, how awesome people were now that I have to work with Bobby, right? And I'm like, okay, man.
In hindsight.
I'm like, those people are incredible.
No, I mean, I joke around about this, but literally, like, when I talk about the fact that I host this podcast for SOCOM, it's not just self-deprecating. Like, I am nobody in this enterprise. Like, I am nobody in this regiment. I'm not a war hero. I'm not like, I've just been lucky enough to do this job for a really long time, and I don't completely crap my pants when there's a microphone in my face. Like, and so for that, I hopefully have a little bit of a head on my shoulders to be able to inject a few of the right questions when I have somebody like Earl Plumley on, who's telling this amazing war hero story.
Oh, Earl.
And rather than it being, rather than it being some guy or gal who's outside the community who doesn't understand asking the questions, I don't have a Medal of Honor, and I've never basically video gamed through a bunch of suicide vests and guys shooting AKs at me with a pistol. But I know that I can be in there and ask the right questions so that you as a listener get to experience it, hopefully even more in depth, to listen to one of the best storytellers. I'm like laughing through that entire episode because he's hilarious, because everything that could go wrong goes wrong other than him getting killed. Like everything else goes wrong, right? But he also is a true American hero and is as humble as possible, because that is the caliber of people. Like I joke about our show, and it's the same for you guys. I could stick my head out right now, and out of 5 people that walk by, I could probably grab at least 3 out of the 5 and have a phenomenal episode. They might be a retired guy or gal who's a contractor. It might be a current active duty person. Like that's the caliber of people we get to surround ourselves with. And we do take it for granted sometimes, but as you get, I get a little, wispy and philosophical at the end of my career here, looking back at look at the amazing people that I've been able to call friends and colleagues, and guys and gals that I've only just looked up to and been like, man, how do I not get kicked out of this team room? Because I am not the caliber that they are. Like, how can I just maintain the ability to be around these people?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and call out Earl and tell Earl he's going to need to come on Pineland Underground.
Yeah, we haven't had him on yet. Like,
yeah, we have.
He's on our list. I don't know what's going on.
We're not going to release, I don't know when we're going to release this episode, but we released that episode as episode 1 of season 4 today, and we have had it for a while, and I've been just sitting there like chomping at the bit, like this is the top 3 episode we've ever done. Like it's an hour and a half. We usually try to keep ours to about an hour, and it is worth every single second that he's on that microphone. I'm just like, in the editing process, you listen to it multiple times, and every single time I've listened to it, I'm like, holy shit, this is freaking phenomenal. Like, get chills every single time. I'm like ready to go run and attack the hill every single time I hear him tell this story, because it's just phenomenal, man. He's a damn hero, period.
Hell yeah. So for our Pineland Underground listeners, tune into SOFcast episode 1 for this season. We want to hear Earl Plumley's story. So share that too. Absolutely. Matt, you're an E9. You've done some pretty credible things, which we've dove into a little bit. And now you find yourself in your 3rd season as the SOFcast host for SOCOM. Now, I imagine you probably went through pretty extensive training. Clearly you've got voice coaches. You've really gotten hands-on. I know you went to, similar to my ILE, probably about 18 months to run a podcast.
It looks like you go to like somebody for the professional face stuff.
He's got makeup on, I think. Yeah. Makeup, lighting.
I heard he's got a whole makeup crew over there.
Oh man.
Anyway.
Oh man.
No, but Matt, give us the origin of SOFcast.
Sure.
3 seasons. Yeah. Why does SOFcast exist? We told you why Pineland Underground exists in your episode that we were guests on. But kind of over to you. What's the origin and how did that happen?
So some of you who've been in the community for a little while, you'll remember a couple years ago, we had a really, unfortunately, we had several kind of high-level ethical scandal issues that, unfortunately, they were, very small number of bad apples that were getting a lot of light shined on them. And of course, because we're very quiet professionals for the most part, except for now we have all these podcasts. But anyway, we are sort of under the radar at that point, right? Other than some of our SEAL friends writing a lot of books and whatever, we didn't really put out there like all these things. And so, Congress multiple times basically said, hey, we want you to look at, is there a systemic ethics issue in the force, right? And so there was a thing launched called the Comprehensive Review, right? It was congressionally mandated. And they went out, similar to what I talked about earlier with the POTFF kind of task force study. They went out and did all of these different, hit all these different places, did all these different focus groups, asked all these questions, came back, wrote like a 69-page report with like 27 different recommendations at the end of it, all that stuff. One of those was, hey, we don't really communicate into our own force very well on some of the things like culture and identity and purpose and some of those things, right? And so the recommendation was to start, lessons learned and all those things, another magazine, right? And at the time, our PAO shop or our communications office here, the senior enlisted leader there at the time, Sergeant Major Teresa Coble, was like, well, we already have a magazine. What we don't have is we don't have a podcast. Like, that's the only really, we've got some social media, we've got all these things, the commander goes out and talks or whatever, but like a lot of people consume podcasts and we don't have that, sort of arrow in our quiver, right? And so she sort of laid the groundwork to start, but she wasn't going to host it. She was a PA, she wanted, and I remember when it first got briefed, I was like, I was doing a lot of narrating for the parachute team. I would go out, and do like little like ROTC or JROTC. Like if they wanted somebody to come talk, I would go talk because I want to promote the brand. It's not about me. It's kind of like what we talked about earlier. Like to me, it was like, hey, I want the next. There's some kid in that Boy Scout troop who might be the next Chuck Ritter. You know what I mean? So can I go out there and just encourage this kid that like, hey, you can make a difference for your country in SOF? And so I was doing some of those things, and I remember thinking like, I bet they're gonna maybe ask me to do this, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I had nothing on my social media or anything else about me being a Green Beret, or like I did not want to become that guy. I didn't want to be that guy that was like, hey, look at me, I'm a Special Forces Ranger, all these, sniper, Sephardic, all this stuff. Like, yeah, I got all that, but it's like really, I don't want to be that guy. I'm not trying to look for shine, right? But we had a lot of conversations. She came back to me a couple times after I turned it down, and it was like, hey, man, what really sunk through to me was we were talking about all those issues and how I was at the time very disgruntled about the fact that our regiment and our enterprise was being represented by people that I didn't think represented the amazing people on my left and right. And the question she asked me is like, well, if we don't tell them who represents us, then whose fault is it when they think those people represent us? Mm-hmm. I was like, all right. And so I was like, can we do this where it's not, hey, I'm super cool, Green Beret. Like, can we make it guest focused? Can we make it focused on the people, right? We have incredible people. Can we gain their perspective and learn like little lessons along the way about how the resilience or how they use POTFF, how they whatever? Can we learn those things authentically through conversations? Then I'm in, right? That was my kind of thing. I was lucky enough to be joined by the SOCOM Command Senior Enlisted Leader. It was Command Chief Greg Smith at the time on a lot of those episodes, which is kind of crazy because I spent my entire career trying to stay away from E9s in power positions and then became like a co-host with one. And it was like, how do we, have this kind of relationship where I got to kind of poke you occasionally and but you're also like 15 years difference, even though we're both E9s, like you could crush me at any moment, there's kind of a thing there, but it was good, and it started. What I realized after a few of them where I got to talk to these amazing people was that this is a blessing. I would never get to talk to some of these people. And I'm equal to flying through Miami and thinking like, how are they paying me for this? There's been guys like Rick Lamb and Nick Lavery and all these guys that like legends, heroes that I would never I'm not going to sit down with them and be like, hey man, will you talk to me for an hour? Like, that's weird. Even if I'm buying beer, that's weird, right? Like no one, I've got buddies who've got silver stars and DSCs and all that stuff, and you never talk about that, right? Because it would be super weird to be like, Chuck, man, hey, I know I just met you, but tell me your story about, Silver Star. But if it's like, hey, Chuck, there's another kid somewhere who might be inspired by that story, come on the podcast. Let's talk about it. We won't make it like you're trying to, hey, look at me, look at me. It's for the right reasons. And then I get to actually learn from that. And then, sure, man, let's put a microphone in there and we can now export that and let other people learn from it as well. And all of a sudden it was like, man, actually, you know what? I tried to run away from this thing, but man, it's awesome. It's a blessing to have a chance to talk to some of these people. And so we just released the beginning of season 4. I'll probably be on it for the rest of season 4, and then I'll retire. And we're trying to figure out, is there someone who comes in and replaces me and kind of takes the momentum? Like we've been lucky to kind of build this thing to where we've got a pretty good listenership. We've got good following. We've got a lot of people in Congress that listen to it, a lot of people down in the team rooms that listen to it, a lot of people, good, mom and pop America that write in and listen to the show, and it's humbling. Like I meet people that are like, hey, man, and I'm like, oh, shit, people are listening to this thing, right? Because, like, when you do a podcast, it's just you guys, right? Mm-hmm. There's no audience, right? And then all of a sudden I'm somewhere in, like, on Sipper, I had a kid from, mortar team leader from one of the Ranger regiment. I think it was 275. And he wrote me on Sipper. He's like, Sergeant Major, I don't know if anybody else is listening to this thing, but I put it on in the mortar cage every time we're cleaning our weapons. And he's like, I don't know about anybody else, but 275 mortars listen to this thing. Nice. I was like, bro, you just made my damn year. I was like, I don't care about anything else. Like, if there's some Ranger Regiment dudes that are finding value out of this, like, let's do it, right? So we're trying to figure out as we transition the show, like, is somebody come and replace me? Do I come back for a couple hours and do, as a dirty contractor? But I think we'll find somebody to come and replace me who will take it to the next level. I'm humbled and just, like I said, I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to have some of these conversations. And now I've found out that I like to do it so much because of the value that I may just start one when I get out, just to be able to, like, call somebody like Earl up and be like, bro, talk to me on Zoom for an hour. Because it's just amazing, man. It's amazing when you hear the story behind some of the people that you have only seen the highlight of, and you find out they're even better than what the highlight was. We try to provide the opportunity as a listener to just be a fly on the wall for a conversation you wouldn't normally hear, right? Sometimes it might be educational, but more often than not, it's really about who somebody is. Like, if we don't tell people who represent the quiet professionals, then we're left with who the media chooses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the quiet professional has been a thing, but maybe we've been a little bit too quiet in some aspects because we need to sell ourselves much better than we have been.
Well, it's been the silent professionals for quite some time, but obviously with 20 years of war and, being deployed across 70 other countries across the globe, like, people have been busy. But rather than, again, being like write a white paper or a lesson learned and throw it on the portal, which is so commonly referred to as like the way we do business as far as continuity and knowledge management. No, this encapsulates that legacy. This can be a push of a button for any legend or opportunity to hear that story. You're not reading the autobiography. You're hearing the words from that person who's actually done it and served within our regiments. That'll live long past us.
Yeah. And you get the ability to force people to be your friend for an hour. Like, really cool people are like, hey, like, you would have probably never talked to me before, but I got this microphone. Be my friend for an hour.
True. But there's also, like, there are some of the educational ones that I'm like, I don't want to do that because I want to talk to this freaking hero or whatever. But there's also value in, like, whatever, when you're sitting down in the team room and you're like, why is this? This is being talked about why, right? Like, shift to GPC. Like, all right, man, I'm tired of the bumper sticker. Like, I'm tired of your homogenized talking point garbage that you give me as the commander that's come through and it went from raw milk to, like, see-through white water, right? Like, everything has been stripped out of it and it is so produced that it doesn't actually tell me a damn thing, right? No, I want to talk to the guy who's making the decisions about those things and hear the color around the lie. I want the actual goodness of the milk, so that if I'm in the team room and I'm a team sergeant, I actually am like, okay, now I get it. We talk about giving people the why, and then we give them a homogenized bullshit why that has been focus grouped instead of just having somebody who actually knows what the hell they're talking about sit down and be like, listen, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're thinking this, and this is what we're trying to do. Because now I have faith and confidence that that person has my best interest in mind and the country's best interest in mind. And now I'm like, all right, they may not make every decision the same way that I think, but they probably got a pretty good viewpoint, and they seem to have their heart in the right place. And you know what? All right, I'm in.
You take the old, like, hey, I want you to go conduct special operations. You're like, what the hell?
Yeah. Like, okay.
This is what you're doing, right?
I think I'm doing it right now. Am I doing it? I don't know.
Please, are we giving any NCO points for the homogenized vignette there?
No, you get officer points earlier because you're the language school director and you plug language in like twice.
Yeah, you
so
did. Yeah, you did.
You get 2 officer points for that. So we do have an emergency clown nose. If you get 10 officer points, you wear it, but I don't have it handy. But we're not in danger of hitting that anyway. But what would you want to message to the force? As a SWCS podcast, we do reach more people than just students in SWCS. We have a pretty large following in the corporate, in the regular Army as well.
Yeah.
So what would you message to guys from your level up there?
As I've sort of talked about throughout this thing, it means something to do what we do, right? It means something to say you are willing to put it on the line, and it means something to the guys left and right of you how well you do it. So proactively making sure that you're working on yourself in all 5 of those pillars of POTFF, like I talked about, but also educationally, also, experience-wise. And I don't mean just going to get your bachelor's, like reading books, studying, trying to better yourself, whether it's across formal education or informal education. How well you devote yourself to this pursuit matters to the nation. It matters to the guys left and right of you, or gals left or right of you. And it really does. You will look back at it as the honor of your life in the same way that I do. I certainly didn't do it correctly. I got more failures than I got successes, I'm sure, but it is still the honor of my lifetime to have been able to be in those team rooms for as long as I was and to continue to serve the nation. If you're listening from a corporate perspective, you will find no better person to come in and problem solve and force multiply in your element, in your organization, in your company, than an SF guy, period. Bar none, no questions asked. I'll put a paycheck on it. If you find the right person who's done what we're talking about doing across amorphous and unconventional and completely asymmetric, and all those are buzzwords that we use. Bottom line is not knowing all of the steps or the rungs of the ladder, but finding a way to scale the cliff nonetheless. Every single organization could benefit from someone who is devoted to going all in to solving the toughest problems to make sure that your organization wins. They may not know how to say that to you, just like I stumbled through it, but give them a shot. I promise that you will come out the other side thinking, how in the hell do I get more of these guys or gals? 100%. And, if you're out in the conventional force and you're thinking about doing this, man, one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. I wish I could go back and do it all again. Just repeat it, get in a time machine, jump back to walking into my first team room and do the exact same thing again for another 13 years. You'll find no better pursuit, I'll tell you that. So I think that'd be what I'd leave the massive millions of podcast listeners for the best official podcast, as your marketing says. I'm chop liver on this side, but yeah.
There you have it, Matt Parrish, SOFcast, proclaiming that Pineland Underground is the best official podcast in the military.
Everywhere I go, there's a poster stuck up in the, I see it all over Chuck's Facebook and everything else. So, I mean, he's influenced me so well. Yeah. He's really pulled in some 37 skills from being there in SWCS for so long.
Just inculcation, just over and over again everywhere you go, right?
Blunt force messaging.
Yep.
Matt, this has been absolutely fantastic. So for our listeners, glad you stuck with us through the episode. It was probably a little dangerous having 3 podcasters across 2 different official military podcasts talking about podcasting. But we definitely delved in some really, really important topics, all of which, again, I really appreciate you wrapping that kind of one up for us, Matt. We get to do some very unique things. We just happen to be in this position where we had the opportunity to tell those stories. It's not about us. It's not about you. It's about the unit. It's about that patch on our shoulder and the flag that we wear. And it's truly about the mates to our left and right. But we, through this opportunity, have the ability to just share and tell those stories and really project them out or export them out like you had mentioned. And it's always humbling to get to do that, especially with you as well, man. Really cool having you on Pineland Underground today.
Hey, I do want to give a warning here. So this is the first time we're trying video. I know I need to look at the camera more. I forget there's a camera. I'm used to not using it. But I think this is what's going to happen. We're going to release this because it's the 3 of us. And we're going to get a lot of messages that are going to ask the question like, hey, man, are you guys really in the military, or did they just hire some models to come in here and do this, right?
It's like when you see a magazine, like, they have like the popped collar and the ACUs still, and it's like, oh man, like clearly that person's
bank commercial guy who's got nothing on his, like the worst stock photo ever, like saluting with his left, he's got a Kevlar on sideways, like,
or he's got his patrol cap on and it just came out of the wrapper, and the popped collar and like the ACUs like Velcroed.
For the record, I do not have any makeup on, you jabronis. I will say that much.
I do see a little
you do have a makeup crew, though, right?
I'm sweating over here.
Because you do have a makeup crew, though. Because I saw last time you guys did the little clicker for the...
We have a clicker. That's about as best as we got. We don't have any makeup, nor do we have any podcast experience or training, as you tried to give me an 18-month ILE fellowship about this thing. No. I guarantee if you listen to the first few episodes of our show, you will have no doubt about the fact that we did not have any formal training about this thing for sure. But hey, man, like you said, Bobby, it's not about us. My goal as the host of this thing is just to not detract from the phenomenal person that I have on, and just hopefully like ask the right questions to make sure that they are putting the, incredible message. Like, I just want it to faithfully come through how cool they are and how cool this job that we all get to do is. So, no makeup, you dirtbags.
Hey, I do got one last real question because I want to know, because this happens to me every time. I feel like somehow when we record, somehow I black out, because when I listen to the podcast, I'm like, man, we talked about that? I don't even remember talking. I don't even remember asking that question. Like every time, I'm like, what happened?
It's just like Will Ferrell in Old School. When he talks about geopolitics with the Raging Cajuns. Like, oh my God, what happened?
But do you have that happen to where you listen to, you're like, man, I had no idea we even talked about that.
He actually has an earbud in, though, and there's the behind-the-scenes crews, like piping and stuff that came out of his mouth.
No, Bobby, no. If anybody did, it'd be you guys sitting over there, cool guy land. No, for me, I will say, I always joke about this, like, nobody likes to hear their own voice.
No.
People think if you have your own podcast or whatever, like, no, it means you have to listen to it even more. And I am the world's worst opener of shows. Like, my team has to edit the crap because I'm like an old diesel, man. It takes me I got to get a couple sentences out and okay, now we can talk. Doesn't matter what I do beforehand. I flub the crap out of an intro. But yeah, there's some things where I have never walked out of any podcast being like, man, we crushed that, and then I listen to it and I'm like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought. I always think the guest crushed it, but I'm always, I think all of us are perfectionists. So yeah, it's just like I said, just walk away hoping hopefully I didn't screw that up because the guest was awesome.
Yeah, Bobby, anything left?
That's it.
All right, man. Thanks, Matt. Truly appreciate it.
Thanks to you guys, man. Thanks to you guys, man. I really appreciate it.
This has been awesome.
Thanks for joining us today in Pineland Underground, the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and Schools official podcast.
Please tune in to our next episode. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
You can reach us at pinelandunderground@gmail.com. Check it out.